Good evening to all of you. At the end of my presentation, I had my introduction of who I am, since probably most of you don't know me. I had it at the front, but I just wanted to jump straight to the information about the railroad. I approached the Historical Society probably a year ago, but more so this year, when we were having a meeting and we were talking about some of the things that people might like to do. And I said, I would really like to do more information about the railroad. And they said, well, fine, you can do it for the Christmas annual dinner. And I said, okay. And so I've been thinking about that, a lot of thinking about that this year. The last month or two has been a crunch time to get it done. So that's one of the problems we have with procrastinating. But just a little bit about me, as was mentioned, I do work at R&L Carriers. I'm a graphic designer, web designer. I work in the media design department, so helping out with organizations like the Historical Society. I'm also involved with Clinton County Trail Coalition, so I try to, when possible, organizations that need people that do design and graphics and web things. I do that stuff, and it's an option that I can try to help organizations like the Historical Society to be able to do. And so I told them, I said, exploit me. I said, I have a lot to offer. I'll give you as much as I can, and I've got some time. So that's a little bit about me. Some of you know nothing about me. I got interested in the railroads partly because of my just being an interested kid in the railroads. But when I lived over off of Port William Road, my in-laws over there had their driveway was the old Grasshopper Railroad. And how many people's heard the Grasshopper before? A few of you? The Grasshopper went originally from down around Spring Valley Marsh all the way up to Midland, Ohio. And most people don't know anything about it, except if you ever going through Port William, there's a big concrete thing in the middle of the creek there, and that's the old trestle that carried that through. So if you ever want to learn about that, I'll tell you that another time. That's not tonight's talk, but it was something that got me excited. And I've been doing that since, I've been working with Mike Mason. If any of you know him from Port William, I worked with Mike from when his wife finally let me talk to him in 2015 until longer than that. We worked for 5 years together. He said he always wanted to do a book, and I said I always wanted to know about the history. He found out I did graphics, and so we worked it out where I did all the production of the books we did. We made a book about the Grasshopper, and he was very happy about that. So I've tried to take all that history and all the interest that I found there and bring it to Sabina and to the Historical Society. Found all the great people that I work with regularly. I get to meet some of you from time to time. So I wanted to look at this, the railroads of Sabina. I didn't think there was that much to learn about it, but by the time I was done, some of you that follow me on Facebook, I said, there's way more interest in this story than anything to do with the Grasshopper. And so hopefully I'll be able to present that quickly tonight so nobody falls asleep. We had a really good dinner. I appreciate everybody taking care of that. And the woman that brought that food out for us tonight did a great job, so hats off to her. So first thing I have on here, and I was told to leave some space in here for questions as we go through here, so I'm going to try to keep it quick. But first of all, thanks to all of you for attending the 2022 Sabina Historical Society's annual Christmas dinner. So I've been a part of 2 of them, so thank you for letting me be a part of your time together and meeting many of you. And one thing that I always started doing in my Grasshopper books, we used to go to Caroline Park, and I've done talks for that book. I always write Saving History right above my signature, because that's exactly what I want to feel like I do. And I think all of you, if you're involved with this society, with the Historical Society, that's basically what all of you are doing. You're saving history. Because every story one of you tells that nobody else has ever heard, that is one story that will never get out there unless it's heard by somebody and recorded. And so it's very important to be able to share things, but it's even more important to document things, and our organization does such a great job of doing that. I know it's a lot of work for everybody. As was talked about, trying to keep water out of the building and everything like that sometimes is a big deterrent and distraction. But that's really my motto when it comes to history, is saving history. And it really affects all of our lives. If you're religious, the Bible, it's all about history. Our family is all about history. As I was talking tonight, people say if you don't remember history, something's bad's going to happen. You need to pay attention to history, or you're going to be in trouble for it. So just some quick things there. But let's get started. Some questions I got up there, and I'll just point those out. I was going to do them one at a time, and there's no way I was going to get done tonight, so I just tried to put them all out there. The questions that I've heard, and probably some of you have heard too, talking about the railroads of Sabina, and remember, it's plural, Not a lot of you, maybe some of you older ones remember two railroads, but not a lot of us younger people know about two of them, but we'll get into that tonight. The questions we heard: did Sabina have more than one railroad through town? When did the old line begin and end? Was the old line part of a small railroad or a big one? Why is it gone now? When did the current railroad going through town begin? Where did the old line go to? Which line was first in town? Does Sabina have a bike trail? Transition there doesn't make sense, but we'll talk about that too. Why does the trail parallel the current railroad tracks? Why does the trail switch sides halfway through Sabina? If you remember the roads when they're in place, you remember they did exactly the same thing. And then number 11 there, why are there concrete posts with a T mark on them with numbers like 120, 121, and 122? And so as we got on there, let's answer these questions. I'll try to get it along through here. I've got, as we get through here, you'll see some little dots on there I put on the presentation. It's got a question mark and a Q on there. That's supposed to be for questions. I was told to leave some time for everybody that wanted to have maybe lend some things that they've experienced that relate to the presentation tonight, just to raise your hand and I'll call on you. You can give me some feedback. There's places where I could not answer what I was trying to find out on here. So some of those questions I put on there for myself to say, guys, tell me about this. I'm expecting Jim to have some answers for me, and I even told him earlier, I said, I'm probably going to call on you for some things, so if you could be ready for that. But I've been told that's how you guys typically do these dinners and these presentations, so as you see those things come up, be ready for them. Just some outlines we're going to be doing. We're going to be going through railroad history. I've got these divided into parts 1 and 2 because we're going to talk about both lines independently, so that's what that's about. We're going to be looking at a railroad map overview. I'll get into this, but I created 2 full Google Maps on both railroads with all the stations on them. So once we're done, if you guys are interested, we're going to put a video together for somebody that was not able to attend tonight, wanted to have a video of this. So we are recording it. I'm hoping we'll have it on our website for people, and I'm hoping that will be able to generate some interest in our society. But I will share that with anybody that would be interested. We're going to look at some newspaper articles. A few years ago when I mentioned newspapers.com, hardly anybody had heard of them, but if I mention that to you guys tonight, there's probably a lot of you who say, oh yeah, I use it all the time. And I've been finding more and more people do. They have newspapers going back into the early 1800s. Every article you can imagine, depending on what your price point is. So we'll look at some of those. We'll look at some accidents on the lines. I kept wondering if there was ever any bad accidents on here, and I finally found some. So maybe you guys don't remember those, maybe you do. We'll take a closer look at Sabina's railroading past. As I give you a little bit more about the speakers, and the biggest thing I think probably for everybody will be the links and references at the end. If you want to look at that, we'll try to have, I'll give Peggy all my files. She'll be able to put that up on our website. Hopefully have a whole PowerPoint up there, how we're meaning to do that. So we'll look at those things too. And as we have on there, I was warned, be ready to participate as we go through. So first off, some of these things I just pulled off the internet. So if you've ever been on eBay, if you're ever looking for history, if you've ever been trying to find documentation about old historic document, anymore, everything's monetized. So if you start trying to find old railroad history or railroad maps or anything to do with the railroads, you'll almost always be taken by Google or whatever your search engine is straight to eBay for things like this. And they'll have these old maps. They're in their full entirety. Some of them have been marked out like that, but they'll have amounts on them. Some of them are really, really inexpensive. You get some that are really nice that I'd probably like to have for $5 or $10. Others of them may be really immaculate, maybe very high amounts of stocks on them or somebody's really famous name on there. And they may be $1,000, $2,000, or even more. So it kind of opens your eyes up. But as I got on there, I tried to caption all these. So I had about the last 3 weeks have been me building images that try to capture all these things. But that's up from March 2nd, 1854. That's from the Cincinnati, Wilmington, and Zanesville Railroad. That is the first railroad in Clinton County. It was also the first railroad in Fayette County. So we'll look at those things here in a little bit. In this particular case, you can see some of these things marked on there. The shares up there, $20, $50 per share. One of the first things I did recently was trying to look at, okay, what was this, how much was this actually in real world dollars for today? It's easy to say, oh yeah, they paid $1,000 for this back in 1800, but it's another thing to think about how much they paid for it today. So back in 1853, 20 shares at $50 each was $1,000. But if you go in today's money, $1 back then is worth $38.70 today. So that investment for just 50 shares right there, or 20 shares at $50 would have been $38,700. So kind of helps you understand when people were reaching off the railroads trying to say, hey, sponsor this thing, hopefully it'll work out for you. It was a pretty big investment for a lot of people. So we'll bring some of that monetary stuff up here in a little bit. My question there is for you guys. Show of hands, how many people have stock certificates for any of the railroads? It doesn't have to even be the two in Sabina, but any railroads there. How many of you have those in your personal, in your family or by yourself? All right, well, just something maybe to look out for. If you find something that your family members have, or you know people here in town that may have had something like that handed down to them, I'd love to see some images of that. And being part of the Historical Society, we'd certainly like to share that with the public too, so try to generate more interest in that. Peggy will recognize this book, I believe, from one of the things that they have at the Sabina Library. The two books that I wanted to get a hold of was one I think that we have in the library in Sabina. The other book I couldn't find the other railroad in. And finally, after talking to Mike Mason, he said, you need to go over to Washington Courthouse because they have this book. And I did find it there. Now, Peggy may have that at the Sabina Library, but I didn't get a chance to talk to her. But we're starting off with the 1882 history of Clinton County. And that particular issue there was from W.H. Beers and Company. So just pointing those things out in case you guys ever get over there. You can find these on the shelf in the genealogy department, right? That's where that's at. Okay, good. So, Cincinnati, Wilmington, and Zanesville Railroad. That was the first railroad to come to Clinton County, and that's also the first line that came through Sabina. In a lot of these cases, I want to talk about Wilmington and some of the other areas around here, but we're talking about the same railroad that came through Sabina. Not many people, my brother is a big rail fan, he says, CW and Z, boy, you're going way back there. And I was like, why would you say that? Most of you that have ever heard about the old railroad that's no longer there probably referred to that as the C and WV Railroad, which was the Cincinnati Muskegon Valley Railroad. You probably heard that a lot more often. Cincinnati, Wilmington, and Zanesville Railroad is what it started off as, and we'll get into why that was. So I'm just going to read these off screen. You can follow along. Maybe a little bit boring. I tried to summarize these things as quickly as I can, but a lot of this was good information. In December 1850, Honorable R.B. Harlan, representative of Clinton County in the lower house of the legislature, introduced a bill asking for this road, talking about the Cincinnati, Wilmington, and Zanesville Railroad, and the charter was granted on February 1st, or February 4th, 1851. Just again, in your mind, think about the timing of some of these things. The name Wilmington became inserted out of respect to the county in which the bill originated. So it had nothing to do with the primary destinations of the line, but because Wilmington and Clinton County's government center was in Wilmington, they just went ahead and did that. Continuing on, November 1850, surveys and estimates were completed from Morrow to Lancaster, 90 miles, and the contract for building that part of the road was awarded to A. DeGraff of Clinton County. It says Clinton County subscribed $200,000 towards its construction. And me being the nerd that I am with money, I said, how much really was that? So if you look down here, I'll give you the website. If you ever want to find out how much something was worth in the past to today, you can go to officialdata.org. And it says in 1853, as we pointed out earlier, $1 was worth $38.70 in today's money. So that $200,000 that Clinton County subscribed to at that time would have been $7,740,000 in today's money. So it really gives you a little bit better picture of saying, why did it take them so long to get around to investing in these railroads? And that's for some of the reasons. Continues on, work commenced in December 1851. In the Clinton Republican of November 26, 1852, it was stated that over 2,000 tons of iron for this road, again, the Cincinnati, Wilmington, and Zanesville Railroad, have reached New Orleans. And that's another thing that's nice to see. You don't realize sometimes where all the goods that you need for making something sometimes come from until you actually look back in history. So it's in New Orleans, to be forwarded at once to Cincinnati. Track laying was to begin as soon as the weather in the spring would permit. The citizens of Wilmington then expected to have a train of cars running to their place by June 1st, 1853. In the latter part of March 1853, track laying was commenced at Morrow. We'll get into that in just a moment, but that is where that railroad started. It connected to the Little Maggie Railroad at Morrow, Ohio, and went from there. We'll also see some complaints about that too. and this is what I've got on here. This is me inserting an editor's note here, and it's also in the same book that I was reading this from. I was just trying to shorten it. It says a few years later, it was stated a mistake for the Cincinnati, Wilmington, and Zanesville to connect with the Little Miami Railroad at Morrow instead of running directly to Cincinnati. I've actually got a newspaper clipping that shows an article from the 1800s saying that exact same thing. It's like, you went all this way, why didn't you just make the trunk line go straight to Cincinnati and not hook up to another railroad? Because as we'll see, what happened to this line, the reason that it went out of being in service was because the Little Miami went out of business. And it's like, okay, where do we go from here? There was no place to go. So they almost made it to Cincinnati. In August of 1853, the road was completed to Wilmington, Ohio. On August 11, 1853, it said some 10,000 to 15,000 people were present, including about 2,500 who arrived at 11:15 on trains of 20 cars. I was really hoping newspapers.com would have some pictures of all those people, but that was just a little too early for them to do that. Trains began running regularly between Cincinnati and Wilmington, one day each way, on August 15, 1853. And again, just think about that short amount of time. Wanting a railroad just a few years earlier and having a railroad that's actually running both ways that quickly. The fare between the 2 points, Cincinnati and Wilmington, was $1.60. It's like, boy, that would be a great deal, wouldn't it? Only have to pay that much. Well, again, going back to my valuation website, that would have been $61.92 today. So some of us probably would have chose Uber or a relative for that. On November 24th, 1853, the company had completed the road to Washington. They just call it Washington in the history book, but it's actually Washington Courthouse, Fayette County. And began to run trains to that point. It was 41.25 miles from Morrow and 77.25 miles from Cincinnati. So if you go all the way to Cincinnati, a lot of that by way of the Little Miami. The line was finished to Lancaster in 1854 and to Zanesville in 1855. In 1856, trains were running uninterruptedly over the entire length of the road. So again, just 6 years it took, not even that, 5 years it took for all that to happen. As of March 1857, the line had sustained a loss of nearly $20,000. When I was doing a book on the Grasshopper, that was almost all the book was. Make an investment, get things together, get everybody excited, and then go bankrupt. And that's not much different than happening to all these lines in the area. Just everybody wanted to build a railroad, and in almost all cases, they just never knew how to fund it properly, or they couldn't get enough freight on it. In March 1864, as part of the reorganization, the name was changed from the Cincinnati, Wilmington, and Zanesville Railroad to the Cincinnati and Zanesville Railroad Company. December 1st, 1869, the road, with all of its franchises, real estate, machine shops, depot buildings, and rolling stock was sold at auction to Judge Thomas J. Jewett, president of the Pennsylvania Central Company, for a sum of $1,004,000. That was in the money back then, so you just imagine, I don't think I broke that out, but it was a lot of money. You also hear a lot of people refer to the old line as the old Pensy, and that's where this started. The Pennsylvania was very involved with that. On May 1st, 1873, the road passed into the hands by lease to the Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and St. Louis Railroad Company under the name of the Cincinnati and Muskegon Valley Railroad, or the C&MV. Again, that's what most people know it by today. Moving on. So some questions and answers. So where do we get the CW&Z to begin and end at? Anybody who's been following me on Facebook, I've been working on this, trying to publish it as much as I can on the historical site. But one thing that Google will allow you to do is create your own maps. And you can save those maps so that they're yours personally. You can share them, they can be private, whatever you want to use them for. I'll get into mentioning his name on here, but most of you have, if you like railroads, have any of you heard of Dan West or the West 2K websites? It has all the station databases around Ohio and the area. He's got a great site, and it's basically you go through Ohio and look on every county, and you click there, and it'll tell you all the stations listed, and then show pictures and details about where they used to be. I referenced some of that. There's never been a place that I could find that actually had our railroads from Sabina with all the depots listed on it, and I even shared it with Dan, and he was like, I'm glad somebody finally did that, so it was nice to work with him on that. So this map is public, and again, I got the link on the end of it here, but we're going to go through and look at some of these stations, and maybe you'll remember some of these places. So we start at Morrow, Ohio. We don't have a pointer, so we're starting right down here. And from Morrow, the railroad went north. So we went to Hicks. So as you just go up from there, each blue dot represents a station. I say Morrow, Ohio, Hicks, Ohio. In some cases, these are not cities or villages. It's just a station name. So as stations typically, there may be 4 or 5 stations within one city area. So but we'll list those. But it's just incredible how many there are. We continue on. So the first 2 are in Warren County. We jump to Clinton County. We've got Clarksville. We've got Ogden, which was the part of the old railroad line is the little Warren peace path that just got on the bike trail. This is also part of this line. We'll get into that. Went through Wilmington. Clinton, Ohio is another station that people have talked about, but nobody's ever had much detail on there. I think it's Stone Road off of 22 and 3 is where that station used to be. So that's where that station was at. We know where Melton's at. Reeseville, Sabina, which is important to us tonight. Then you go from Clinton County, you jump over to Fayette County. You go to Jasper, Washington Courthouse, New Holland, Pickaway County, Atlanta, Ohio. I'm just going to say stations on there. So Williamsport Station, Kinderhook Station, Circleville Station. Now we're over to Fairfield County, Stroudsville Station, Clear Creek, Amanda, Delmont, Lancaster, North Bern, Bremen, still going, Junction City down in Perry County, New Lexington, Lionsdale, McLooney's, Brooksville, Roseville, now in Muskegon County, Del Carbo, McCrea Park, Cussack, Darlington, Fair Oaks, not done yet, Zanesville, which was where the old termination was, but we're not there yet, Gilbert's in Muskegon County, Ellis, Rock Cut, Dresden, Trinway, and that's where it stops there. So that's taking all those stations up the line there. I think there may be a slide on here that talks about that, but they were trying to have it set up almost every 3 miles there would be a station. Some of them were very small, but when you have a steam train, what do you need the most of when you're driving trains? Typically water or something to make fire, right? So they can't go very far without getting those things refilled. Yes?
Just to say, if you got one at the very beginning, go through to the very end, is there any estimation of how long that might take?
We'll see on some timetables. I'll hold that off for now. Some of the timetables give you that answer on there. And if you don't know what a timetable is, it's basically a directory of how long it's going to take you to go from place to place. I believe the full trip was 4 hours from Cincinnati to Trinway on there, but we'll have to confirm on that. And if you couldn't hear the question was how long would it take to go the whole line? Yes?
Why did they bypass Columbus?
In this particular line, I think they were trying to get around it a different way so that they could hook back up to go over to Pennsylvania, because they wanted things to get to the East Coast as quickly as possible. And again, a lot of this is still fairly new to me, so I'm just telling you what I've gleaned so far. But when you went straight into Columbus, just like today, if you have to go to Columbus, you're having to go to the Columbus airport, you know you're going to get stuck in traffic every single time. The beltway out there and everything out there is going to slow you down. Trains back then do the same thing. We're going to get into a lot of traffic. If we're trying to get to the East Coast, let's just bypass Columbus to get there more quickly. And so they would try to do that. So that's my best answer on that, but I hope that helps out. Was there another question?
Was the line mostly for passengers or private?
The trains, the question was the line for passengers or for cargo? Almost all the rail traffic was intended to do freight because freight was very profitable. They could park at places and they could take it places, they could do it in mass volumes. They didn't have to have people peeing and whatever other things they eat and those kind of things. The passengers on the trains were very costly and hard to keep up with, and freight doesn't get impatient. People get very impatient, and so that was not a very profitable thing for them. It was mostly about glamour. And so freight was what they were concentrating on. Passenger service was just a convenience for them. So, anything else? Holler at me if you need to. So some of these are the newspapers.com things I was telling you about. And again, if you've never gone to newspapers.com, please check them out. They have it, what I keep doing with it, they have it as cheap as $7.92 a month. You can do a monthly thing, which if you do the whole year, it's much cheaper just to buy an annual subscription. But I typically am working on things that pop up randomly, and I need to have a lot of information, then I don't need it for a while. So I'll just subscribe when I want to. So for like $8, I was able to get almost all this information. But it's basically just a search. It does the entire country. You can use outside the United States for that smaller amount there, and you get to get almost all the local newspapers. You can pick your state, you can pick your year, your bandwidth, but newspapers.com, that's pretty handy. So here's two newspapers. We're looking at the Wheeling Daily Gazette out of West Virginia, November 4th, 1856 there. I tried to make sure we could get through this more quickly, so I tried to highlight in orange there the important parts of these. Hopefully I can read them on the screen here. But you can see one on the left says Cincinnati, Wilmington, and Zanesville Railroad merchants, manufacturers, and the public generally are hereby respectfully informed that the CWZ&R Railroad Company is now prepared to receive and forward freight from the temporary station in Zanesville as Service Street South, Main's. It has all the cities listed on there. I'm not going to be able to see it well enough to go through all those things there. But maybe you have a little bit better vision down there. This was an early timetable that we have here. I mentioned that timetable just to give you an idea of the travel time on there. It says at the top, open through direct route to Cincinnati in the west. And we talked about east and west trying to bypass some of these big cities. 2 passenger trains daily each way, so that was already in 1857. Again, that's from March 14th from the Wheeling Daily Intelligencer. Leaving Zanesville at 8:15, and then you can see you can ride down to Cincinnati at 5:04. So 8 a.m. to p.m. down there. That kind of answers a little bit of your question on time frame on there. A little slower than I said, so. But you can see from place to place, they have those timetables on there. Again, these things have been super interesting, but they're also a time suck for trying to make a quick presentation. So these will be available for you on the video, and I'll try to get the PowerPoint posted for you to look at. Any questions from anybody? I got my little question button on there. The next one, we've got the Baltimore Sun. So we see other papers around the country talking about these two railroads. The part that I've got highlighted there just talks about already, you're dealing with some of the financial parts of that. It says that a meeting of the parties so interested will be held at the office in Cincinnati, city of Cincinnati, Ohio, on the 10th day of March, AD 1864 at 10 o'clock. Of said day for the purpose of reorganizing a body corporate under the original charter of the Cincinnati, Wilmington, and Zanesville Railroad. So already by 1864, it's making national news that they're doing a reorganization. The Fayette County Herald every year talks about this. This is what I had mentioned earlier. It didn't take very long for them to start complaining about the right-of-way. It says it's 11 years since Cincinnati, Wilmington, and Zanesville Railroad was opened for Morrow. Zanesville, this was deemed an auspicious moment for the region through which the road runs. High hopes were entertained that we too should have a great through trunk line over the commerce of the east and west should pass for all time. These hopes have not been realized. Why? The difficulty lies at the beginning. The blunder was committed of commencing at Morrowtown instead of Cincinnati. So right off the bat, they're complaining that they're basically depending on a small railroad line, which the Little Miami was not too small, but it wasn't nearly as big as they were trying to connect with. And they only missed Cincinnati by about, not even 40 miles, maybe 30 miles from Morrow, but it's one of the reasons why we don't see it today. Continuing on, I'm not going to read all these, but I'll just leave them up there for you. From the Boston Daily Evening Transcript on December 2nd, 1869, and just talking about the railroad and the bondholders, some of the financial parts there. Down in the Washington Courthouse Record Herald on September 18th, 1976. It's a new version of an old report, but this was from New Holland talking about the railroad coming there and how they were working on lights. It's kind of a historical article, but it's kind of cool. Wilmington News Journal, really significant. That's one thing I've been impressed with. There's been some instances of the newspapers here in Sabina years ago, but most of it's been the Wilmington News Journal, and it goes way back into the 1800s. In this case, they're talking about the Muskegon Bridge finally getting done, that final connection that they were trying to get up around Zanesville. So one of the things was kind of holding them up there. Any questions? This is one thing, I think I've got a question mark on this one. Yeah. So inducement is not a term that I've heard before. I think I understand what it's talking about. I reached out to Mike and I never could get him on here. But I went ahead and put the definition on, and I'll tell you what I think it means. But it says that an extra inducement from now until May 3rd. This was from April 15th, 1885. It says to the people living on the lines of the railroad from Sabina Reeseville, Melbourne to Wilmington, Hicks Station, Clarksville, Ogden, Wilmington also Cuba, Marlow, Blanchester, and Clinton Valley to Wilmington. We will on all purchases amounting to $10 and over refund the amount, the railroad fare to and from Wilmington to any of the places named. Take advantage of these inducements as it costs you nothing to come and go. An inducement definition is a motive or consideration that leads one to action or to additional or more effective actions. So my question to you, has anybody heard of a railroad inducement before? Because if you say, nobody's got a hand, I can give you a little bit more of what I think it is. But as I understand it, and I've looked at some more detail on this, it's basically a way to try to encourage people to get on the railroad if they haven't been on there before. And they're saying, get on the railroad and we'll actually pay for your ticket. So it was a great way. The idea, and what I was reading up on it, was to try to encourage people to get on as a passenger, to realize the effectiveness of as a passenger, and then try to encourage them to get in as a freight hauler or some way like that. So, something that maybe you could research and tell me an answer on there as well. All right, jumping over, we're going to be talking about the other line, which is the line that's still in Sabina today through Wilmington, and that's the B&O. So this is another item that was available on eBay.com. Can't remember what the price was on here. I never did find one for the Midland Railroad, and that's what we're going to be talking about here, is the Midland division of the B&O. It's the second line that came through Clinton County, or the last line to come through Clinton County, but it's the second railroad that went through Sabina, and it's one that still is through Sabina that the Indiana and Ohio run on. So this is what a stock certificate from the late 1890s or early 1890s would have looked like. Probably the same thing that people would have gotten when they invested in the Midland division of the railroad, but I just put that up there for you to look at. Again, going into a new version of the same history of Clinton County. This is the one that I couldn't find in Sabina. And again, like I said, Peggy may have that hidden back there someplace. I missed it, but I did find it at the Washington Courthouse Carnegie Library. And what it talks about, this is from the 1915 version by B.F. Bowen and Company. It says the journal in its issue of February 21st, 1883. So remember, we started off in 1851 with the one railroad. Now we're about 20 plus, around 20 years later. February 21st, 1883 set the machinery going in the agitation for the proposed railroad from Columbus to Cincinnati. They're talking about why they bypassed Columbus. In this case, they were trying to get to both Cincinnati and Columbus, which makes sense. What did 22 and 3 used to be called? Do you remember what? Yes, the 3C. What was the 3 C's? Yeah. If you were trying to get to those places on rail, wouldn't it be smart just to put the rail right beside that road? That's what they tried to do. So this project was the work of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company. It was their desire to build this road in order that a direct line from Columbus to Cincinnati might be secured. This would run from Columbus to some point on the Marietta-Cincinnati Railroad, probably by Washington Courthouse in Indiana, or perhaps Blanchester to Wilmington. So they already had existing lines in place, and they're trying to figure out the best way to connect them up. So some of this report is really I kind of like it because it's like them trying to figure out how this is going to work out. The historical document says the location depended to a certain extent on the enthusiasm which would be shown by the citizens on the different places and the assistance which they would give the proposed line. And even though that history book is from 1915, I love this next line. In other words, the route was open to the towns which made the best proposition. It actually said that. I thought that was pretty funny. But it was true. In the Journal, April 18th issue, it says the following headline is set in large type. Left again, proposed road to Miss Wilmington, owing to a lack of interest of the citizens of this city. So you see what we see in the newspaper these days too. As they have on in the document or in the book, judging by the way things eventually turned out, this was a clever advertising scheme on the part of the promoters. For in this issue, it set forth the possibilities which this road would have afforded the citizens of this town, talking about Wilmington. But through their lack of interest, the golden opportunity had been lost. In the next issue of the Journal, a lengthy article was written about the Midland line, the gist of the article being to the effect that it was not entirely too late for the citizens of Wilmington to secure this proposed line if they really wanted it and would show the proper enthusiasm. And it's just keep teaching somebody taking a carrot and they going around. Come on, we see that totally today. The book continues that the issue of May 9, 1883 bore these startling headlines. $100,000 is the price which the Midland Railroad will cost this county. proposition was set forth as follows. If the citizens of Clinton County would donate $100,000 to and the right-of-way, which is important, they don't talk about that, but they just say donate $100,000. Remember, a right-of-way needs to cut through people's yards or fields or whatever they have, so it's a very important point right there. The proposed line would be run through this county. The route of this line would be through Sabina, Wilmington, and Cuba. Again, going back to my money thing, we jumped from 1851 to 1883. In 1883, $1 is equivalent to $29.51 in the value of 2022. So this $100,000 price that they're asking for in 1883 would be the same as us paying $2,951,000 today. And again, think about that investment from the county of Clinton County, and then think about all those people's yards that we'd have to cut through and how much property would have to be surrendered for that. This money was to be divided between 3 towns. I really like this because Sabina plays a role here that's pretty significant. And follows. Wilmington and Union Township, $60,000. We kind of expect that. Wilmington's big. Even back then it was pretty big. It had a college, it had a lot of business. So they took the gist of this. Sabina and Richland Township, $25,000. And Cuba and Washington Township, $15,000. So this is them trying to figure out how to meet that $100,000 request. The book states that though the proposition was accepted, in the end the funds came up short. However, it goes on to say that each of the 3 towns or townships raised in extra funds to meet these shortfalls. That was my comment, not the book's. The following was the contributions by the townships. Wilmington and Union Township, they donated an extra $66,441.50, again, in those funds at that time. Sabina and Richland Township came up with another $20,830, and Cuba and Washington Township came up with $10,118, totaling $97,399.56, a deficit of $26.18. So they almost got there. This deficit was apportioned among the 3 townships as follows. Wilmington and Union Township, just breaking down what they lacked on there and then trying to make up for it. On October 8th and 9th, 1883, work for the grading began. I didn't put inside there that they agreed to the deal, and they finally got everything taken care of, so that was supposed to be. The work was rushed through and hoped to have completed by July 1st, 1884. So they're hoping to have this whole thing done in just about maybe 8 months or so. The first train to make the through trip over the entire route from Columbus to Cincinnati passed through Wilmington on November 13th. This was a special train and carried the members of the Board of Trade of Columbus. I'm glad they were very confident in it. The hopes and dreams of the citizens had been realized, and Wilmington now had the service of 2 roads. So I know this is a lot of talk about Wilmington. Wilmington was the primary importance to the Clinton County books of history. They should have been aware Sabina was more important, but we just tried to stand aside and let them take all the credit. It was supposed to be fun, in my opinion. So some questions on here. Where did the Midland Railroad begin and end at? It doesn't seem like it's a very big thing there, but I did another map on here, completely separate. I keep debating whether I should have done both of these in the same place so that you can turn one of them on and off, but I like how I've got them separated right now. In this case, I did one thing different though. Where the starting point was there, I did include some extra distance on there, I believe, but that is the same thing as what I talked to you about before. Google Map, you can zoom in. I'm showing the typology of Ohio on all these maps because it really, I think it tells you a neater story. If you have a computer and you want to go to these places, you can get on there and click down just like you're trying to go on a trip with somebody, and you can see all the valleys and the flat places. And sometimes for us people that like finding old railroads that don't exist anymore, you can use typographic information to see where the flat places were in the middle of all these hills and valleys and stuff like that. So it's really interesting. But if you go on there, there's a little button on the very bottom of there that lets you switch maps. So you can turn on satellite view or anything like you do for all the Google stuff. Cities, starting with Midland City at the very bottom. That's where Midland is. It was called Clinton and Clinton Valley at one time. I'm not going to go down there, but anyhow, that's where we're starting. So we're starting at the southwestmost point, and then we work our way up. So we work from Midland to Cuba, to Wilmington, Clinton, Ohio, Melvin, Reeseville, Sabina. So those are all in Clinton County. And we can move into Fayette County. So we got Rattlesnake, another station, Jasper Mills, Washington Courthouse, Bloomingburg, Madison Mills, Cooks, all in Fayette County. Not sure why I had the question up there, but I guess I'm just curious how many people remembered any of those stations. Now that that's become all entirely freight line, a lot of those stations don't even exist anymore. Continues on Madison County, Mount Sterling, jumping over to Pickaway County, Palestine, Derby, Morgan, again stations, not cities. Over to Franklin County, Pleasant Corners, Grove City, Briggsdale. I thought it was no Grove City because it's a good place to stop here on our way to Columbus to get something to eat. Green Lawn, finally Columbus. And that's where it terminated there. So it went beyond both of those points there, but those were the stations that were specifically on what was called the Midland Railroad. Any questions or anything at this point?
Since I spent a lot of time in the last few years over in Greenfield, one of the people famous in Greenfield, Edward Lee Fleming, the guy who basically donated to the school. He was, I guess, the equivalent of a millionaire in the latter part of the 90s and the early part of the 20s, because his company, the horse college, it never dawned on me how he got them from whatever factory was there in Greenfield, how he got them out to people who use it. I mean, there is a railroad through Greenfield.
Yep.
So that had to be an offshoot of one of these lines.
Yeah, well, we probably will recognize it here in just a second. I think you'll see that. So there's actually two of these maps, and I sometimes get confused. The 1912 Railroad Map of Ohio, for any of you people that like library and research and history and stuff like that, have probably found this online. The Library of Congress has an enormous database of historical documents like this, and they have them in ridiculous resolutions. This map here, there's one version, it's a JP2 file, which if you've ever dealt with an image, you know what a JPEG is probably. There's a JP2 file, which is even higher resolution. The one image on this thing is like 67 megabytes. It's so huge. I mean, I could make a map that would cover this wall and you'd be able to read it as clear as day. It would just be amazing. But this is free online. A number of other libraries carry this, so you can find this on your own. But all those places I got, all those stations listed on there, are all in this, and we're going to look at some of that right now. But there's another version of this, I think it's an 1886 version of the Ohio Railroad maps. It has almost the same information, but this one was most popular. And so my question there was, has anybody ever seen that or read it? Okay. So here's the area that we're talking about. It looks gibberish right there, but let's put some things on screen here. There we go. So everything in green, that is the Cincinnati, Wilmington, and Zanesville Railroad. That was the original route, running down to Morrow, all the way up to Fenway, right up there at the top. So it's all in red, and that's also from my Google map. That's the 1912 map that I just showed you. In orange, and all those green dots, those are the stations that we just talked about. The orange dots are all the ones on the Midland line, the Midland Railroad, and that's where it ran from down in Midland up to Columbus, and you can see where all those stations were there. And as we zoom in on one of these other things, I'll show you something else. But you can see all these little things throughout here, all these little things off on the side that are angled like that. Those are all stations. Super interesting. Really gets taking your time on that. This is zoomed in. You can see it's a very old map, even though it's in high resolution, so you can see the tears in it and where they scanned it. But what I've called out there is showing where the two lines originated. Midland City here for the second line, and Morrow for the first line, and all the stations on there. We jump from down there to go into the middle of Ohio. You can see how far this first line ran up there where it went to Columbus. Jumping back over to some newspaper articles here. This was showing a stencil drawing of Irwin Auger Bit in Wilmington. Not sure if anybody ever remembers that. Shows railroads there, but that newspaper article right there says, from May 16, 1883, Wilmington has offered the Ohio Midland Railroad Company $100,000 to change its survey so that their road would run through this city. And that's pretty noteworthy. Even though it's a small article like that, it's exactly the fruition of what we were just talking about. They were saying, okay, this railroad's gonna go to some city that's interested in taking it on here. Well, Wilmington ended up doing that, but it wasn't just Wilmington. Sabina had a role in making sure that that happened too. Some other newspaper articles there, Wilmington Daily News from June 30, 1916, just talking about some of the names. A lot of people are always curious about naming engines, some of the steam engines. And the two lines that ran on the Columbus and Cincinnati was called the Cincinnati Limited and the Capital Limited. And it talks about the times that they left and departed from those two cities on the B&O line. Over here is the Wilmington News Journal from April 27, 1916. This was going to be another question. I think I got one of my little cue markers on there. Yeah. Before I read that, somebody without looking at that screen, tell me, what is a yeggman? Y-E-G-G-M-A-N. All right, see if reading the article tells you anything. The headline there says, Yeggmen visit Sabina office, but are frightened away before they succeed in blowing the safe. Yeggmen last night made an unsuccessful effort to blow the safe in the freight depot of the Pennsylvania Railroad in Sabina. And it goes on to talk about all the things that didn't go so well for them there. So you think you have a better idea what a yeggman might mean? I'm not going to tell you the answer, so I'm going to send you home with that one. Okay?
Isn't a yeg a safe cracker?
It is. That's exactly the right definition. A yeggman is a safe cracker.
Okay.
So if you know anybody today that's called a yeggman, make sure you keep an eye on them. I thought that was good. There's not too often. Dictionaries have always been of interest to me, and encyclopedias. I don't come across words I don't know too often. And I got two things in the preparation for this, and I didn't remember. The yeggman was one of them, so good job there.
This is a bit of an offshoot question. In the negotiation for right of way, the people who constructed the railroad would have had to take into consideration the cost.
Sure.
Now around here, we don't recognize, maybe we do, this area is really flat,
Yep.
but not very far south of here. This comes back to my trips to Greenfield all the time. If you drive toward Greenfield on the Sabina and Greenfield pipe, about halfway, you can start seeing hills in the distance. And all I can ever think of is that's where the glaciers stop. We are very close to where the glaciers of the Ice Age stop. No, they can stop moving. And that's where those hills are.
Mm-hmm.
People might have called them mountains, but they're just
Sure.
really big hills.
Yeah.
But in constructing a railroad, we would have had to take that stuff into consideration.
Absolutely. And that's one reason, most of you that have lived in this area have probably seen this happen a lot. I used to live in Corwin and in Waynesville, and even here in Wilmington off of Port William Road, you've probably seen these oil guys come through and dig all these pipelines up and put new pipelines down and stuff. Interestingly enough, the one section that they used to cross where my in-laws property was the old Grasshopper Railroad bed. And the reason that they kept putting those oil lines within like 100 feet of that railroad line is because those engineers saw the most flat route, and so did the oil guys. I'm like, we're going to do the same thing. We're not going to go through up in all these little valleys and stuff. But you'll also see that one of the, not in my presentation, but one of the things that killed the CNMV was the fact that it had to cross so many places. And you talk to Bruce Sanders with the Clinton County Trail Coalition that I'm a part of. One of the things that they like about extending the trail all the way down to Morrow one day is because all the places that old railroad line crossed the rivers and the creeks down there. I think we'll get to this, maybe you see some of the streams there, but that's neat scenery, but it's a headache like crazy for railroads. Every time there's a flood, you've got potential loss of freight traffic, so good point there.
That's why the railroads out west, when they were doing the transcontinental, the guys coming from the west toward the east took so much longer to go, not
Yes.
nearly as far.
Yep.
Because they had to cross through the mountains.
Right.
They got paid.
Right. Yeah, that's a good story there too. So this is from July 23rd, 1956. There's a lot of things going on here. One of them was talking about, I think it was engine 223 up there. That was one of the engines that did regular trips up and down the railroad line, the B&O. There's a boy's first trip on the train. It was just a little bit too hard to read, so I'm not going to hold the time there. One of these guys is a retiring engineer. The other one is a retiring fire tender or something on there. But the train's going away, so they let them do the last ride on there. more articles that you can find on newspapers.com. I guess I had the question on there just in case anybody remembered that newspaper there. I don't. Okay, these are some, I've got some really good scans from Bruce Beam. Some of you might know him. He's a big railroad fan as well. He had called me recently asking for some things about the Grasshopper, and I said, well, that's good because I want to talk to you about the two lines in Sabina. And so we went over these things. He gave me this timetable from 1939. It was from the Baltimore and Ohio, and the timetable are super interesting. I've actually got them with me tonight. If anybody's interested, I can show you. I wasn't sure if Bruce was going to be here tonight. I was going to give them back. I've got some things from Susan from her talk there. But you can see some of the cities on there that you might recognize. Starts at the top of Midland City, goes to Cuba, Wilmington, Melvin, Reeseville, Sabina, Glendon, down to Potter, Washington Courthouse, Bloomingburg, Hayne, Madison Mill, Cook, Mount Sterling. That other one I can't read. Durst, Orient, Pleasant Corners, Grove City, Briggsdale, Bald Street, GE Towers, and then it stops there. So that whole thing is just to tell you about where your starting and stopping point is. I was trying to do mileage because you see at the top there, it's at Midland, it has nothing there. Each time you go down there, it tells the distance. And so from Midland to Cuba was 4.7 miles, to Wilmington was 14.7, and it goes on down there like that. So if you're ever curious about the distance, this is a great thing to have. But those are pretty interesting documents. Zoom in just to show you some of those areas a little bit bigger so you can read them better. Then we get into some newspapers about the B&O passenger stopping. It just talks about the 2 passenger trains finally stopping service, and that basically saying automobiles basically ruling. Nobody's riding the trains as much because it's too much trouble. We have to wait at the stations, and it's a hard time for us. And so we're switching to freight. That's basically what they're saying on several of these articles. So that was from December 2nd, 1954. Another 1954, not about the demise of the railroad train. I do have a few of these accidents. And since this is talking in Sabina, you might be interested in that. I'm not sure how many people would remember any news about this, but it says none injured in a train car collision. The train hit a car at Halsey Street crossing the Pennsylvania Railroad in Sabina Saturday. But no one was hurt, and there was only minor damage to the car. And it talks about the person and where they were from. I think they were doing 5 miles an hour, the train was. Talking about the last passenger train through the B&O again. Now we're going to look at some stations with the old depots in here. I've tried to marry a few things, some of the maps, some of my maps, and then some of these station pictures. And a lot of these pictures are from that West 2K website that I mentioned earlier. If you've ever been down to Midland and you've looked over, when you're going south and you look to your left, you'll see this building. It is worth going over there for sometime. It looks terrible. It looks like it's about to fall down. And a lot of people say that this barely held together. But the brick walkway out there for the old ramps and everything, it's just amazing. And that building has been in the middle of those two things. That left part that goes north there, that's the part that brings the B&O through Sabina, Wilmington, and on up. That line that goes straight there was some of the areas that we were just talking about, what some of the places out towards whatever those towns are out there, like New Vienna, that kind of area there. So there used to be connections there, pretty important. The question was for if anybody's ever been over there. I saw some nods, so I'll just assume that was right. Some of these other stations you may never have seen. I've never seen them, and a lot of these were pulled from that West 2K side, but just kind of following along our map whenever I could, I tried to show where the station would have been. This is the CMV, or the Cincinnati Muskegon Valley Depot at Clarksville. So what's that? That's what that looked like when it was there. Now we're going to get into some things on Wilmington and Sabina here that's got multiple captions on here. I'll try to explain them. But on the bottom left there, that's the Cincinnati Muskegon Valley Depot in Wilmington on the left there. But there's actually 2 stations in Wilmington at one time. I couldn't find a good picture to show both of them, but I'm pretty sure the B&O Depot is the one there on the right of that picture. On the top there is also the B&O Depot in Wilmington, so it's the same building that you see down the bottom. It's also the same building that you see here. You see some of these other buildings that you might recognize in the outside of today. But again, on our maps, that's where most of those would have been. So 2 different depots, 1 city. Really cool map there. I think that's from historicmapworks.com. Some of you may have looked at that before. They sell maps, but they also have some high-res images that you can really zoom in on. And that's from, I don't remember the year on there, I meant to put that on there. But that was showing when just the Cincinnati-Muskegon Valley Railroad was going through Reesville. You've done the bike path at all, you notice a little weird way that you have to kind of work your way around that property there. That's because when they built the bike path, which was the old railroad bed, they had to kind of work around that property that they bought that. So, but you can see there is a pretty significant siding. If you don't know what a siding is, it's basically just a piece of rail off to the side to either park a train on for freight loading and unloading, or let a train that's going one way get out of the way of one that's going a different way. But that interesting thing there, it's kind of hard to see on here, but some of the properties, there may be some people there that you might recognize some family name for them. Again, Historic Maps Works, I've got that coded in the back of the book. For me, this was one of my favorite parts, talking about Sabina, because I kept seeing everybody showing me these pictures of the old depot, and I'm like, I don't know which one's which. I know there was two of them, and it was really hard for me to see. But this is the B&O depot, so that's the one that would have been serving what is now the Indiana on the Ohio line there. But that would have been on the north part of town. So as you're going up 729, this would have been the last station that you would have come to. I've got another picture in a second that'll really make sense to you. It does to me. So another postcard, there are a lot of postcards of Sabina on there. Again, on my map showing where both of these were at. The Cincinnati-Muskegon Valley Depot is this one. The B&O Depot is the one that we just looked at back there on the back. So the town of Sabina would have been back here, and you're working your way north. Big train there, you can see the tracks. I'm sorry?
Railroads make monetary contributions to the town to build depots, or they just assume that everybody would want a depot there?
Like we were talking earlier, they typically went where the main thoroughfares were, and town will either pull them in, or like what you see if you watched any of that. I can't remember, there's two shows that have been on some of the streaming channels recently about just the railroads that went throughout west, and so they were often trying to lure people to get involved with them, but it was just kind of hit or miss on there. They mostly were trying to get from Cincinnati to Columbus, and we just happened to be a town in between there, so they tried to take advantage of 729, 22, and 3. So the next image is one of my favorite ones. It's probably some of the best imagery we've got on there. Again, we're still talking about Sabina. B&O Depot, there we're looking as we're going north out of town. The Cincinnati-Muskegon Valley Depot, they're in the middle. The freight station, which you see back here beside the train, is this freight station. So we've all twisted around and looked back this way. Now the Cincinnati-Muskegon Depot that you see in the middle there is right there. This is what you see way back in the back. So you kind of have a little bit better picture of how the tracks were laid out there in Sabina at the time. Now this one is probably one of my biggest questions. I think I've got a question marker on there for everybody out there. I thought I found something I've been looking for a really long time, and I was going on Google Maps and it said on Morgan Street. Well, if you know Sabina at all, how close is Morgan Street to any railroads that's ever been in town? Like 10 of them? It's completely the wrong place, isn't it? Morgan Street is on the south side of town, the railroad is on the north side of town. I'm still not positive this is not something that was in here. I was talking to Jim earlier, and he does remember there was an interlock station in Sabina across from Mac Tools, so this might be correct. But one of the bad things that Bruce Bean did for me is what I got from him image-wise was him taking pictures of a computer screen with pictures that he was looking at, and he just kept taking pictures and sent them to me. This was one of them I managed to clean up, but I was totally guessing. All I could read from the caption on there was this, and I knew that was wrong. But as we'll get into something else on here, I've got another question for you. So does any of you remember the interlocking tower that was in Sabina?
I remember when it was there, I kept thinking the train went under, but apparently it didn't, because you see where the tracks cross, and they had to throw the switch for the right train, you know, of course, standing up. Then I would say early 50s that was taken out.
Does that look like the train, the tower that you remember? Or is
I remember the tower was a great big tall building.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So the reason I got this X'd out is I haven't been able to prove it. And any of you that are good history fans will always know you don't tell people history unless you're sure of it. I'm just kind of tickling your interest there because I don't have proof on there. I think this is accurate, but the way that train, that split works there, if you've ever been on a bike path out there, that split doesn't go out that far, so I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I'll keep researching that and I'll see if I can find an answer for you. But that segues to this. You've probably seen this as you come into Sabina almost every day if you drive here a lot. I've been told by too many people that this part of that building is part of that old tower that used to be in Sabina. Too many people. But I can't prove that's what it was. I even reached out to the woman, I finally met her recently. I can't remember her name there. She widowed, but they have that barn still. She knows it's probably going to fall down any day, but she said, that's where my husband and I met. Another part of that story, that's what all this is about, I found it and I could not find it again, but there was a place called the Fox something, and it was a place where people used to go to in the 50s and 60s, and it was kind of like a sort of, not really probably more like a drive-in produce place. The people, what I was understanding, they used to sell foxes there, like a fox stole or something like that. You could wear them and buy them there. But they also let people come in almost like a drive-in. It was supposed to be super popular, and that's what that building was there. So every time I tried to reach out for answers on that, somebody said, oh no, that was the place where I met my wife or my grandma and grandpa met, and he told me all these things. Like, nobody said anything about railroad. And then I mentioned it to somebody else, and they go, oh, that's the old tower and the old barn. They just had there was no connection there. So if you find out information on it, please send it to me or the Historical Society. We'd love to do a little bit on it, because if this building falls, that history is going to be lost. And like I said, saving. Yeah, that's right. But it's still interesting. The woman I talked to on there, she says, I'm not going to take it down. That's where we met.
I see it mentions the Fox Farm is one idea.
Yeah.
And that does sort of bring it up to me to kind of, because I remember that it kind of looked like that at one time.
Yeah.
I was a kid.
I'm sure where I found that was an article that the Wilmington News Journal published looking back in time to when that was popular, and I could not find that article again. I normally bookmark everything, and I just could not find it. So if you guys find anything about that, it would be a nice thing for Peggy and I to put up on the website to explain what was going on. Jumping over to Washington Courthouse there, I've got too much to read there, but those are still two of the stations and the free buildings that you can find over in Washington Courthouse. That place, if you love trains, is just a great place to walk around. There's so many buildings that are railroad related. But those were part of the Cincinnati and Muskegon Valley Railroad. The Quincy went through there, both of our lines went through there. They're on the map about right there. I'll hurry a little bit just to get you guys out of here. Cincinnati, Muskegon Valley Station in New Holland. Never been out to that area there, but some really cool pictures. My favorite thing about New Holland, it is the terminus where the purchase of the Clinton County Trail Coalition bought the right-of-way for the old bike, or for the bike path, and so when Fayette County gets around to it, they can go out that far, but there's still some bridges and stuff out there that are pretty cool. And again, map down there shows you we're about halfway through the line. We don't have stations on all of them, so don't worry about it. This is from Circleville, Ohio, showing what the station looked like back then. This one I did want to read. I thought it was kind of cool. This was from Circleville, another one of the Cincinnati Muskegon Valley depots that was there. I think it's been torn down now. We're almost straight under Columbus right there. But that text there, if I can read it, it says that the first locomotive with a train makes the first appearance in Circleville on March 13th, 1854. And it's too hard to read. But anyhow, we'll have this up for you to take a look at it. Again, just interesting newspaper articles there about the depots and their demise. This was in Zanesville, Ohio, two-story building. It was actually the Cincinnati Muskegon Depot. I think it was big like that because they had people kind of work like a hotel as well. Now we're all the way up here on our map. I thought this was pretty cool. This was in Trinway, Ohio. In the 1913 floods, we think about the city of Dayton and the floods that we experienced. Well, rain doesn't just go to one city and then move on. It came across this whole region. And so sometimes you forget about Cincinnati and Columbus and all these other cities being affected by the flood. But that was from Trinway, Ohio, following 1913 floods, all the way up at the top left on the map. Talked about some accidents earlier. Wilmington News Journal from October 2nd, 1964. It says freight train crashes through. That was from the Champion Bridge Company. So you can see the Champion Bridge Company, both of those pictures, and where the train ended up. One story I was reading about, since the boys were playing around, there was multiple wrecks I'll show you here tonight, but one of them was just kids being naughty and caused a train derailment. Another one was just a switch that was left open by accident and caused another train disaster. This one is from November 15th, 1969. It says 47-car freight train hits the Irwin Auger bit due to an open switch from the Wilmington News Journal. So, significant accidents that I never remembered anything about. Another one I didn't know about was this one from the Wilmington News Journal in '74. Most of it's talking about the tornadoes, because that was the year that we had all the tornado outbreak, in Xenia and everything, but it says 29 freight cars of chassis system derailed near Melbourne. So a pretty bad accident there, one I didn't know anything about. More collisions and accidents, none injured here in Sabina. This map is pretty cool. This is from the Sanborn Paris map. Something I'd never come across before, but it was another place that I had found from some of the online libraries that have. These things are very elaborate. I really wanted to spend some time looking at some of these buildings because they're super interesting. But it shows you a very good detail. I grade in the lines that are showing where the old mines used to be. So the B&O is what curves around, goes up to the top. It says right there, the B&O Railroad. Talking about where the depot was there, and the Cincinnati Muskegon Valley was down here. It shows all the sidings that was through town at that time. Even a siding all the way over here. So it might kind of work into what we were talking about with Jim earlier. But that would be online for you to take a look at. I was hoping we have some time to talk about that, but that's a lower part of town. Talked about these T-posts on here. Number one, I think we got a question on. If you've ever walked on a bike path, you've probably seen these before. A lot of people didn't know on there. The T on there, from what I've talked to people about, what was the designation of the distance to Trinway, Ohio. So when we were showing you Trinway right above Zanesville, that was supposed to be the distance. I'm not confident in that because I built that Google map exactly where the old railroad was, and I only came up with about 93 miles from Morrow to Trinway. So I had, either my mileage is not right through Google or something, but there's no way it's 122 miles from Trinway to my backyard, which is about where that's at. But I'm just showing you there on the Friendship Trail, if you ever walk out there, see if you can find those, they're really cool. I mentioned some information about me, I pretty much have everything on here, but if you're ever curious, you can read these things. And then just a little bit, this worked into some more history with me, but this is a map from the Clinton County Trail Coalition, and it's showing the current trails that are active. The red line right there from North Bourne Road to Melvin is the Clinton County, or the Clinton Fayette Friendship Trail, which we have here in town. There's a big gap because it's not connected down to Wilmington yet, but that's the plan. And then some of those other locations are where that's gone out. The Luther Van, keep missing part of his name there, Warren Peace Path in Wilmington, and the new extender that they just put out there also is part of the Muskegon Railroad that runs through there too. So. And mostly just asking the question if anybody knew that whole rail system is there. All these links, I think I got 3 pages of links there. You're certainly welcome to them. I'm happy to share my PowerPoint presentation with any of you. It's got all these places that I've got information for, including my Google Maps, including some of the metropolitan libraries, newspapers.com. We've got our Historical Society on there too to make sure I don't get in trouble. And then I got some candy here for you. If I can play it. So about 2 weeks ago, I'm looking out my back window. My fiance was looking out the window. She said, "The train's coming." I was like, "Yeah, I hear it." I went back to get my phone, thinking it was going to be a freighter. I just thought, I get a picture of it. I looked out there, and all 5 of these cars went by. I'm like, oh my gosh! I ran for my phone, and it was gone. So we both jumped in the car and went chasing after this. And we called it out to who was I talking to? He said what road it was on. Remember what road I was at? It was the road right after North Bourne Road when you're heading to. Okay, yeah. So anyhow, those cars there, if you've ever heard of the Ohio Rail Experience, I've done that twice. They have these trains, they do these trips all over Ohio, and they'll meet in these odd towns, and they'll drive you in these odd towns, and you take these old Pullman cars like that. But that was on the B&O, Indiana and Ohio line. It was just here on the 19th, so just something cool that just happened to happen. I was working on this presentation, and I looked out the window and we took off chasing it. So that's a presentation. I'd be happy to follow up when you guys get time. I appreciate you sticking around and not falling asleep on me tonight. But glad to be part of the organization here in Sabina. Glad you could all come out, and please, I'd love to keep talking about this as the time goes on. So thanks for